It felt the same in the small-town vet clinic. The moment Anna kicked open the doors, everybody in the waiting room turned their heads. Her face was blank, her hands shaking. She was drenched to the skin, her waterlogged jacket sticking like a leech. But she didn't care. Dr. James Carter, an experienced veterinarian who had treated just about everything in 2 decades of practice, barely had a moment to respond before Anna charged toward him. "Please, help her," she said with a catch in her voice. Cradled in her arms was a golden retriever, weak, hardly breathing. A pregnant woman with a swollen belly, but something was not right. Dr. Carter immediately reached for the dog in Anna's arms and placed her gently atop the exam table. The only sound in the room was the strained breathing of the dog. Anna's heart raced as she watched the vet closely inspect the poor thing. "She's been having trouble for days," Anna whispered. "I did find her on the side of the road. I think she was abandoned." Dr. Carter put his stethoscope to the dog's belly, and his brow furrowed as he listened. Something was off. It was terribly, terribly wrong. He looked up at Anna, and his expression was unreadable. "How long was she out there?" he asked, his voice steady, but with authority. "I do not know," Anna said. "Maybe days, maybe longer. But she's pregnant, isn't she? You can save her, right?" Dr. Carter didn't respond immediately. Instead, he seized the ultrasound machine and quickly spread the cold gel over the retriever's distended stomach. When the monitor finally flashed to life, Anna leaned in, scanning the screen for movement. Any indication that the puppies inside were alive. But what they saw froze the vet in her tracks. The room seemed colder, the air heavier. Dr. Carter held his hand over the screen. His mouth went dry. "This," he paused, barely able to bring himself to speak, "this isn't normal." Anna's breath hitched. "What do you mean?" "Are the puppies okay?" she asked, desperation in her voice. Dr. Carter didn't respond right away. He stared at the screen as if trying to read every inch of the image. It was obvious that the retriever was pregnant. But there was something else within her. Something unlike he had ever seen before. Dr. Carter put down the ultrasound wand, rubbing a hand over his face. He had done hundreds of emergency C-sections, but this was different. He didn't know what he was about to extract from this dog's abdomen, but he did know one thing. Time was of the essence. "She needs surgery, now," he finally said, fixing his eyes on Anna's face. "Whatever is in there, it's not just puppies." Her arms fell from her sides as Anna felt the blood drain from her face. "What do you mean?" What else could be in there? Dr. Carter inhaled, and his hands were already moving fast to prepare for an emergency operation. "I don't know, but I intend to find out." As the veterinarian scrubbed in, Anna paced the waiting room, her hands clasped together. Red flags were waving in her brain. This was no ordinary dog, no ordinary pregnancy. And deep down, she knew, whatever was in that retriever's belly, it was going to change everything. There was no going back now. The golden retriever was still on the table under the bright surgical light, her breathing shallow but steady. The sedative had worked, and all that remained was for Dr. Carter to start. Anna stood outside the operating room, fingers pressed to the glass, heart racing as she watched. She felt utterly helpless. "Please, be okay," she whispered. Dr. Carter inhaled deeply. Then, with the precision of decades of experience, he took the first incision. But as soon as he did, his breath caught. Something was wrong. The tissues inside the dog's belly weren't right. They were less fluid, more viscous than they ought to have been. He changed his grip, dug head deeper. I navigated through the abnormal layers. The air in the room grew tense. His veterinary assistant, Mark, noticed his hesitation. "Doc, you okay?" Dr. Carter swallowed hard. "This is not one of those things I'm accustomed to seeing." And then he saw it. But inside the retriever's womb were not just puppies. There was something else, something covered in an odd, thick membrane. The heart monitor beeped steadily, and Dr. Carter reached in gingerly, making his way gently into foreign territory, brushing with his fingers along the mysterious mass. It felt like nothing he had ever touched before. Smooth, yet frighteningly synthetic. "Mark, get the camera," he said in a tone laced with awe, but also dread. Unable to wait still any longer, Anna shoved the door open and walked into the operating room. "What's happening?" "Are the puppies okay?" Dr. Carter did not reply immediately. He gently pulled out the first pup, tiny, fragile, but alive. Relief washed over him, but then he reached for the second, and his fingers closed on something. Solid. His stomach dropped. "Oh my God," he murmured. Mark, now behind the camera, zoomed in on the surgical site. "Doc, what is that?" Dr. Carter hesitated. His heart pounded, because what he was seeing was not just another puppy. It was a whole different thing. Anna took a tentative step, her eyes fluttering between the vet and the operating table. "What do you mean? What's wrong?" Dr. Carter finally raised his eyes to hers. "Anna, I don't know what this is." A chill swept through Anna as she felt her entire body go cold. There was a moment of unmoving sound, the monitor only beeping, tangling inside the heavy silence in the room. And then, as if on cue, Lucky, the golden retriever, twitched. Not due to the anesthesia, not in pain, but as if she were responding to that which had just been pulled from her. And suddenly, the whole room was much, much colder. For a long moment, nobody said a word. All there was the slow beeping of the heart monitor doctor. Carter felt the unusual solid object he was holding tremble slightly in his hands. It wasn't a puppy. It didn't even appear to be something fitting in a living organism. Mark swallowed hard. "Doc, what is that?" Dr. Carter's mind raced for an explanation. It was ensconced within a thick, translucent membrane, but through the layers he could make out something inside, something dark, misshapen, and deeply unsettling in its utter stillness. Dr. Carter began, but he didn't have one. "I don't know." Anna took an uncertain step forward. "Are the other puppies okay?" Dr. Carter nodded, collecting himself. He immediately pushed the unexplained clump aside and returned to examining the retriever's womb. He slowly pulled out the other puppies, one at a time. 4, 5, 6, tiny, frail bodies, still curled from the heat of the womb, each surviving, barely moving, but alive. Anna gasped, putting a hand to her chest. "Oh, thank God." But as relief washed over them, Mark couldn't look away from the unusual object resting on the surgical tray. "What do we do about that?" he muttered. Dr. Carter took a scalpel in hand. The effect was stable, though unsure of control. He must have known what lay inside. He made the first incision into the membrane with a steady hand, and as soon as the blade broke surface, a thick, dark fluid seeped out. The smell hit them right away. Something rancid, something that should not be inside a living body. Mark gagged. "Oh, that's not normal." Anna covered her mouth, her eyes wide. What is that?" Gwendolyn shrugged off the growing unease and pressed on. As he tore away the membrane, exposing the inside, his whole body did the same. What stretched before him was an unprecedented sight. It was canine, but wrong. Twisted limbs, underdeveloped features, a mouth that appeared sewn shut. And worst of all, It was completely lifeless. Mark took a step back. "Doc, what the hell?" Anna froze, her stomach twisting in horror. Is that another puppy?" Dr. Carter's brain struggled to compute what he was looking at. It resembles a fetus that didn't develop properly. But deep down inside, he knew that it was more than that. There was something about it that felt wrong. This should not have been in her womb, Dr. Carter said slowly. "What are you saying?" Anna said, her voice nearly a whisper. Dr. Carter exhaled sharply. "I believe someone did this to her." Silence. Mark's eyes widened. "You mean someone inserted that into her?" Anna's legs felt weak. She clung to the edge of the table for support. "But why?" she choked out. Dr. Carter's jaw tightened. "That's what we have to find out." But deep inside him was that sinking feeling that whatever the answer, they wouldn't like it. And lucky, the golden retriever unconscious on the table had been the unwitting vessel for something much more sinister than any of them understood. For years he had shepherded emergency surgeries, helped deliver puppies, treated every kind of medical emergency he could imagine. But this was more than he had ever dealt with. It was Anna's voice that broke the heavy silence. If anyone had put that thing inside her, who could do something so cruel? And why? Dr. Carter took a breath, putting his scalpel down gently. "I don't know, but I intend to find out." Mark moved in closer, taking in the dark, still shape. His face scrunched uncomfortably. This isn't just a birth defect, is it?" Dr. Carter shook his head. "Number? So this isn't a birth defect for someone born without a heart. This isn't nature's mistake. This is intentional." Some distant part of his mind stirred. An old memory, a case study he had read years earlier, about unethical breeding experiments, manipulation of pregnancies. He shook the thought away. That can't be it. But a sinking feeling in his chest refused to go away. Anna saw his distressed look. "Dr. Carter." He looked up. "We need to know where this dog came from. She wasn't simply discarded. Someone dropped her here for a reason." Anna swallowed hard. "But how? We don't even know who she belonged to." Then suddenly, Mark snapped his fingers. "Wait, the microchip. Every stray we get, we scan for a chip, don't we?" Dr. Carter's eyes widened. Of course. If she had an owner, we had a lead. Without a moment's delay, Mark took the microchip scanner and ran it up the retriever's shoulder. The device beeped, displaying numbers on the screen. She was chipped. Owner: unknown. Registered address: redacted access. Restricted: previous medical records. Mark frowned. That's weird. Dr. Carter's stomach churned. He had never encountered a record so severely censored. The vast majority of abandoned dogs had at least some history. Vaccinations, previous vet visits, owners' names. But this, someone had done a factory reset on almost everything. Anna peered over his shoulder, eyes moving across the incomplete file. What does that mean? Dr. Carter's jaw tightened. It means someone doesn't want us to know where she came from. The implications gave Anna the shivers. Someone had gone to great lengths to ensure this dog was gone, but why? And what did that make of what they had just withdrawn from her? "Dr. Carter?" The voice at the other end of the line was low, nearly careful. "Yes, who is this?" There was a brief pause. Then, "If you value your life, stop inquiring about that dog." Dr. Carter's knuckles turned white on the phone. His heart raced in his chest. "Who are you?" The line went dead. Anna looked up at Dr. Carter, her eyes large. Was that a threat? Dr. Carter exhaled sharply. He'd gone up against angry pet owners, emergency cases, even legal disputes. But never this. We didn't just step into something bigger than we could ever dream. Mark swallowed. What do we do now? Dr. Carter gazed down at Lucky, the golden retriever who had somehow become the linchpin of a mystery far more complex than his rescue. He made his decision. We find out the truth, no matter what it takes. The line was dead, but the import of the words still lingered. If you're smart, you'll quit asking questions about that dog. Anna's breath was shaky. Who was that? Dr. Carter did not respond immediately. He put the phone down gingerly, looking at the screen as if waiting for it to ring again. Mark broke the silence. Okay, that was creepy. Dr. Carter exhaled sharply. Someone doesn't want us to look into this, and that tells us we're on to something. Anna swallowed hard. But what? Who goes to such lengths to conceal a stray dog's background? Mark leaned in tighter, speaking mountain climbing low. Someone who's got something to lose. Mark groaned. They've got this thing really buttoned up. Dr. Carter rubbed his temple. Let's try another way. He picked up his phone and punched in a number he remembered. I was greeted by a familiar voice after a few rings. This is Officer Danvers, Animal Control. Danvers, it's Carter. I need a favor. We have a rescued pregnant retriever with a limited microchip history. Someone has gone to great lengths to bury this dog's history, and I need to know why. There was a pause. Then Danvers's tone shifted. Carter, drop this. Dr. Carter stiffened. What? I mean it. If you found anything, forget it. It's bigger than a stray rescue. Anna and Mark looked at each other, overhearing the conversation from across the room. Danvers, you know me. I don't just drop things when an animal's been hurt. Danvers sighed. Look, Carter, I shouldn't even be telling you this, but if you're seeking answers, travel to 432 Oakwood Drive. That's where she was last spotted before being dumped. That's all I can say. Dr. Carter wrote the address down, but before he could ask another question, the line went dead. Mark said, shivering, as Anna, Dr. Carter, and he stood in front of the house. It was as if no one had lived there in years. Mark muttered, Great. This definitely doesn't feel like the beginning of a horror movie. Anna shot him a look. Not helping. Dr. Carter took a step forward and pushed open the rusty gate. If this is where Lucky was from, we have to see what we can dig up. The three of them gingerly crept inside. It smelled of mildew and dust, as if time was frozen. Spidery strands hanging over furniture that hadn't been touched in years. But as they moved farther into the living room, Anna's foot struck something. She looked down. A leash, and beside it, a dog bowl, still full of dry, rotting food. Mark bent down, examining the contents. Someone used to keep a dog here, but it doesn't look like they left willingly. Anna's voice was little more than a whisper. I don't consider her a pet. Dr. Carter's eyes narrowed. That's out of place. Mark moved in closer to test the handle. Locked. From the corner of her eye, Anna noticed something in the nearby vicinity. A rusty key on a dusty table. She shook with her trembling hands when she picked it up. Guys, what if this was where she was kept? A pause came between them, before Dr. Carter took the key and gently turned the lock. Click, the door creaked open. The basement was cold, too cold. And then they saw them, rows of cages empty and rusted attached to the walls. Some were broken open, others still bore thick, frayed chains attached to them. Anna gasped, covering her mouth in horror. This wasn't just a home, Dr. Carter said softly. This was a breeding operation. Mark stepped forward slowly, eyes searching the floor. This wasn't just breeding. This was experimentation. Dr. Carter turned his flashlight, nailing something in the corner. Papers. Dusty, stained papers strewn across a table. He picked one up and caught his breath reading the heading. Next to it, a blurry picture of a golden retriever. Lucky. Anna's heart pounded. She wasn't someone who was just a stray. They were doing experiments on her. Dr. Carter clenched his jaw. And whatever they did, they were trying to cover it up. A crash from upstairs froze them all in their tracks. A footstep. Someone else was here. A slow, purposeful creaking filled the house above them. Anna clutched Mark's arm. "Tell me that was the wind." Mark's face was pale. "Yeah, I'd love to, but I'd be lying." Dr. Carter instinctively reached for the flashlight sitting on his desk and turned it off. The basement sank into nearly total darkness. The only light was the pale moonlight coming through the fissured basement window. Another step. Closer this time. Dr. Carter waved for them to be silent. He walked to the stairway, examining through the narrow space between the slats of the ancient wooden stairs. A shadow moved. Someone was inside the house. "We have to get out," Anna whispered, her voice so quiet it was almost inaudible. Mark glanced at the only exit, the staircase. He shook his head. "No way we're getting through, whoever that is." Dr. Carter's mind raced. There were no other doors in the basement, no windows large enough to crawl through. They were trapped. Then another noise. But this time, it was not footsteps. It was scratching. The unmistakable sound of claws scraping wood. The sound sent a shiver through the three of them. Anna reached out instinctively for Dr. Carter's arm. "What is that?" The scratching grew louder, faster, more desperate. And then, silence. Then his flashlight swept over something unusual in the far corner, an area of the wall that seemed different from the others. The wood was slightly uneven, almost as though it had been hastily repaired. "Mark, help me," he said, cringing, crawling toward it. Mark rushed over, trailing his hands along its surface. He pushed up against one of the panels, and it moved, a hidden door. Mark's voice was a near whisper. "You have got to be kidding me." Anna's nerves were shot. "It doesn't matter to me what it is. If it gets us out of here, I'm in." Dr. Carter exhaled slowly. "Stay close." With one last shove, the panel opened, revealing a dark tunnel. Anna hesitated. This doesn't feel right. Dr. Carter shared that gut feeling, but he knew there was no alternative. "We don't have time to think. Let's go." They crawled in through the cramped space, one at a time. The tunnel was unsettlingly long. It extended well beyond the point the house should have finished. "That doesn't make sense," Mark muttered. "How is this even here?" Then right ahead, Dr. Carter's flashlight cast around a steel door. Bolted, shut, rusted, but clearly at odds with it. Anna swallowed hard. What the hell is this? Dr. Carter leaned forward, brushing his fingers across the surface. There was something etched into the metal. Facility 47. Mark's stomach dropped. "Oh, no, that can't be good." Dr. Carter's jaw tightened. We simply discovered what they were attempting to cover up. And then, before any of them could react, they heard a clanging sound behind them. The concealed panel they had crawled through. It had just slammed shut. They weren't just escaping. They were being guided to somewhere. Dr. Carter's heart raced in his chest as the voice reverberated through the corridor. It was low, slow, and way too close for comfort. Anna's breath caught and Mark tightened his hold on the flashlight. "Who's there?" "Dr. Carter," he demanded, his voice steady in spite of the adrenaline flooding his veins. No answer. Then another sound. Footsteps. Slow, measured steps coming from the tunnel they had crawled through, one heavier than the next. Anna gripped Dr. Carter's arm. "We need to go, now!" His hands trembled as he walked backward toward the control room. "That vent, can we seal it?" Dr. Carter's mind raced. Removing the vent, if they could do it, maybe. Too late. A shadow loomed at the mouth of the tunnel, tall and motionless. The faint, green light in the room only allowed them to see the shape of the intruder, and not much more, except the flash of some metal they held in their hand. Anna let out a sharp gasp. "They're armed!" Dr. Carter stepped between her and Peter. His heart was pounding now, though he tried to remain calm. "Who are you?" Silence. Then the figure stepped slowly forward. The light struck their face, and what framed this scene was a man in a black, tactical jacket whose expression was inscrutable. "You shouldn't have come here," he said again, the voice empty, lacking any emotion. Dr. Carter balled his fists. "What the hell did you do to that dog?" The man cocked his head slightly, as if weighing the question. Then, out of nowhere, he jumped forward. Mark jumped, stumbling back and sending a pile of dusty files crashing to the floor. Dr. Carter seized Anna's wrist, yanking her behind him. The man was slippery, too slippery for someone in a closed room. Then he stopped, just inches away, and smiled. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he said. Dr. Carter's gut twisted. There was a disturbing quality to him, something that wasn't right. "Let us go," Anna said, surprising herself with how steady her voice was. The man's smile didn't fade. Instead, he dug into his pocket and retrieved a key card. Mark narrowed his eyes. "What the hell is that?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he threw the key card on the desk. "You want answers? Go deeper." Anna swallowed hard. "Why would we trust you?" The man's smile finally disappeared. "Because if you don't, they'll go after the dog, and you won't be able to do anything to stop them." Dr. Carter's blood ran cold. "Who's coming?" The man retreated into the tunnel. "The ones who made her." Then he was gone. There was a long, heavy silence. Mark startled, leaning just to disappear down and pick up the key card. "I can't believe I'm saying this, but we're not actually thinking of using this, right?" Anna exhaled shakily. "We came this far. We've got to know what's going on." Dr. Carter stared at the card in Mark's hands. It was scratched, weathered with time, but legible. At the back of the room, a locked door caught his eye. He made his decision. "Let's find out the truth." Dr. Carter plucked it out of Mark's apparently ironclad grip. Every instinct in him wanted to turn back, to walk away from this place before it could be too late. But the minute he looked at Anna, he knew he wasn't going back. Not now. Not after everything that they had seen. Mark sighed loudly and ran a hand through his hair. "So, just to be clear, we're really about to open a door in a secret underground facility after being warned by a mysterious dude who definitely looked like he's got something to hide." Anna shot him a look. "You can remain, if you want." Mark scoffed. "Hell no. If we go home and die, I'm not dying alone." Dr. Carter walked over to them and moved to the locked door. It was metal, heavy, and cold to the hand. The edges were bent as if someone had previously attempted to pry it open, whatever lay behind it. Someone either desperately wanted in or desperately wanted out. He took a deep breath, swiped the key card. A mechanical beep rang through the room. Then a click. The lock released. Anna swallowed. "Okay, No going back now. Dr. Carter opened the door. The air that blasted back was another thing. Stale, heavy, almost metallic. The hallway beyond the door was narrow, fluorescent lights flickering sporadically overhead. Mark stepped cautiously over the threshold. Why do I feel like we just entered a horror movie? Dr. Carter felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Stay close. They pressed on, their footsteps echoing through the sterile hall. Cool air washed over me, and I stepped into the long corridor with reinforced glass panels along both sides. Some were entirely empty, but others held old, rusted operating tables, dusty medical instruments, and metal cages large enough to fit something bigger than a dog. Anna looked from window to window. This was not just a lab. This was a containment site. Dr. Carter's eyes were fixed on the road ahead. A file cabinet, its drawers ajar, papers strewn on the floor. He rushed to the front, snatching at the documents. His breath caught, experimenting on genetic variants. Subject number 47, golden retriever status. Terminated, escaped. Anna looked above his shoulder. Terminated? But Lucky is still alive. Mark was rifling through another stack of papers. His expression darkened. Not all of them made it. Dr. Carter skimmed the rest of the document. Each line of that text became more disturbing. Subjects show increased physical and mental endurance outside of normal canine behavior. Gestation period was accelerated, with unpredictable mutations, suggested termination. Subjects demonstrate increased emotional intelligence, their ability to stick in the mind and take a strange, unique place amongst people. He exhaled sharply. They weren't just producing dogs, they were looking to build something bigger. Anna's hands shook as she reached for yet another file. A photo slipped out. Her breath hitched. It was Lucky, still a puppy. But she wasn't alone. Several other retrievers had joined her, all with matching golden coats. Some looked absolutely normal, and some had mild deformities, elongated limbs, different eye colors, wider jaws. And underneath the photo was a menacing note. Subject number 47 was the only one to show full stability. Anna's voice wavered. So that means all the others, they're gone? Mark let out a slow exhale. Lucky is the last one left. A sudden clatter from farther down the corridor made them all freeze. Dr. Carter tensed. We're not alone. Anna grabbed his arm. We need to get out of here. But just as they began to turn back toward the exit, the lights went out completely. Then came the sound, a growl, low, deep, and from somewhere just ahead of them. Dr. Carter squeezed harder on the files. His pulse was racing now, because whatever was in here, it was still here. The corridor fell into a choking silence. The air was thick with something like dread. The growl, low, guttural, and unsettlingly intelligent, raised the hair on the back of Dr. Carter's neck. Anna pressed against the wall, breath shallow. Mark curled his fists, his body tight with fright. The darkness was complete. The sound was all that filled the space, not a warning from just some animal. It was something else, or rather something that knew they existed. Then movement, a dull rustling, just beyond the beams of their flashlights. Dr. Carter forced himself to control his breathing. Stay calm, don't move. Mark's voice was little more than a whisper. Yeah, right. Let me just go, not freak out while something is growling at us in the dark. Anna's hands were shaking. Can we please leave? Right now. The growl stopped. Silence was deafening for a split second. Then, one claw grated against metal. Slow, deliberate. And then, from the bottom of the hallway, a second growl. Not one, two. Dr. Carter's stomach dropped. They weren't alone, and they were surrounded. Mark gritted his teeth. "Tell me we have a plan. Hopefully one that doesn't involve dying down here." Dr. Carter's mind raced. They needed a way out. Fast. His flashlight darted down the corridor and landed on a door a few feet away. A security panel. The key card. He yanked it out of the pocket, gripping it so tight that his knuckles turned white. "That door. We run. On my mark." Anna's breathing hitched. What if they're faster? Dr. Carter swallowed. "And then we get to it before they can stop us." Another scrape. The creatures were getting nearer. "On 3, he whispered. 1, a slow exhale. 2, the sound of claws clicking on the tile. 3, run! They bolted. Mark raced ahead of the rest of us and reached the door first. He pounded the key card onto the panel. Access granted. The lock released. Dr. Carter seized Anna's arm and pulled her through just as Mark opened the door. They stumbled inside, just in time to hear something heavy slam against the door behind them. A thud, a growl, louder this time. Then, silence. Anna slumped against the wall, panting. That was too close. Dr. Carter stepped back from the door. His heart still pounded, but his attention went to what they had just entered. A new room. Whereas the others had been smashed, this one was whole, functional, and lit. Rows of monitors hummed softly, pulsing with data. At the far end was a big glass enclosure. Mark dragged himself up and surveyed the room. "Where are we?" Dr. Carter moved forward, eyes squinting as he read the glowing text on one of the screens. Anna's voice shook. "Lucky was the last of them." Mark exhaled. "I don't think we were seeking answers just like that." He turned to Dr. Carter, his expression grim. "I think we were supposed to find this." Dr. Carter's eyes turned to the glass enclosure. Something about it felt off. Then his stomach dropped, because inside the enclosure, something moved. Dr. Carter's breath caught in his throat when his flashlight beam skimmed over the glass enclosure. Something inside shifted. Anna stiffened, gripping the lip of the nearest console. Mark took a step back, hesitantly, his face pale. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the figure inside surged forward. The creature slammed against the reinforced glass with a loud bang echoing through the room. Anna gasped, stumbling back into Mark. Dr. Carter didn't flinch, but his pulse was racing. There stood a dog inside the enclosure, or rather, something that looked like one. Its body displayed the form of a retriever, the golden fur matted and streaked with grime, its body tense and alert. But its eyes, they weren't normal. Leaking an unnatural amber glow, the pupils were decidedly enlarged. Its body pulsed slightly, as if something inside it were still adjusting. Mark swallowed hard. "Tell me, that is not what I think it is." Dr. Carter inched forward, his voice nearly lost. "It's one of them." "No," Anna said, her voice trembling. "But Lucky was the final one, wasn't she?" Mark exhaled sharply. "Then what the hell is this?" The creature inside it issued a low growl, its jaws opening just a little too wide. Sharp, white, vicious teeth glinted as I walked into the room. Dr. Carter's mind raced. This wasn't natural, it wasn't just bred. It was engineered. Then he saw it. On the creature's left ear, partially obscured by tangled fur, a tattooed number. Anna's breath caught as she followed his gaze. "Oh my God!" Mark's face contorted in fear. "That's not Lucky." Dr. Carter stepped closer. His fingers glided over the dusty glass as he read the faded ink. Anna gasped. This was one more experiment. Dr. Carter's stomach churned. Lucky wasn't the only survivor. Mark clenched his jaw. "So, what became of this one?" Dr. Carter didn't answer. He was too engrossed in the monitor next to the enclosure. Lines of code danced across the screen, punctuated by one chilling phrase. Mark frowned. "Wait, what does that mean?" Before Dr. Carter could respond, the lights in the room began to flicker violently. The thing behind the glass became stiff. Then, with a nauseating crack, its body began shifting. Anna let out a shaky breath. "We need to go, now!" Dr. Carter didn't hesitate. He waved for Mark to follow, then took her by the arm. They rushed toward the exit. Bang! The glass shattered. A loud, inhuman growl echoed all around. Dr. Carter hardly had time to spin around before something sprang from the enclosure. Mark screamed. Anna froze. Dr. Carter's heart stopped. Then the power went out, and the room went completely black. The room dissolved into pitch blackness. For a moment, all Dr. Carter could hear was his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Then the silence shattered. A low, guttural growl surged through the air. Anna's sharp inhale filled the pitch black. Mark cursed under his breath. Something moved. Fast. A sharp, scraping sound and claws dragged across metal. Dr. Carter tightened her grip on Anna's wrist. "Stay still." His voice was hardly more than a whisper. Mark's breath was ragged. "It's in here with us." Another movement. This time, closer. Then, a breath. Not theirs. There was something else breathing in the dark. Anna gave a barely audible whimper. Dr. Carter's mind raced. No power, no light, no way to see. Now the creature had the upper hand. A shuffling sound. It was circling them, stalking them. Then a flash. Just a flash from a backup generator. Just a second of light. But it was enough to see. The beast was no longer behind the broken glass. It was their face. It was right there in front of them. Dr. Carter had little time to react before it lunged. Just as a blur of golden fur and two sharp teeth slammed into him, he shoved Anna aside. The blow staggered him, his back smacking against the cold tile. A snarl. Hot breath against his skin. The thing had the weight of a pinning. It was more powerful than any regular dog. Too strong. Dr. Carter raised his arms in time to prevent the snapping jaws from reaching his throat. Anna screamed. Mark moved. An arc of silver. Mark's flashlight bashed into the beast's side. A sharp yelp. A snarl of rage. The weight lifted. Dr. Carter struggled for breath, turning to his hands and knees. His mind spun. That thing wasn't just a dog. It was something else. The emergency lights sputtered to life again, barely, but brightly enough to make out the creature. It was a few feet away, its golden fur rippling in waves. Muscles pulsed oddly under its skin. Its eyes burned amber, operator pupils pulling in and out with agitation. Anna grabbed Dr. Carter, pulling him up by his arm. "We have to go." Mark was already moving. He gestured to the far end of the room. "There's another door. Run," the creature growled, taking a step toward him. Then it stopped. It turned its head slightly, gazing directly at Dr. Carter. Recognition. Anna's fingers clawed into his arm. "Why is it staring at you like that?" Dr. Carter didn't know. But before it could begin to register, the creature emitted a sharp, high-pitched whimper. Then it turned, and it ran, fading into the darkness. The heavy silence returned. Mark breathed out, dropping his flashlight with a clang. What the hell just happened? Dr. Carter's eyes stayed locked on the darkness into which the creature had disappeared. His mind was racing, because that thing could have murdered him. But it didn't. It hesitated. And that scared him more than anything. Dr. Carter froze, his pulse thumping in his own ears. The gravity of the moment weighed on his chest. Whatever that thing was had hesitated. Anna's voice pulled him back. "We need to get out of here, now!" Mark was already in the room scoping. That was running, but it's still down here somewhere. His voice trembled even though he tried his hardest to remain calm. "And I don't want to be here when it decides to return." Dr. Carter made himself move, his legs stiff with the tension. His brain ran through the possible scenarios. The beast had known him. That much was clear. But why? Anna tugged on his sleeve, jolting him from his reverie. "Come on!" He followed, his thoughts in a jumble as they sprinted toward the only remaining exit, the door on the far side of the room. Mark got there first, grabbing the handle and pushing against the metal. It wouldn't budge. Locked. Mark growled with irritation seeping into his voice. Anna glanced around wildly. There must be another key card. Dr. Carter's eyes flicked to the control panel beside the door. A biometric scanner. "This is not just locked," he muttered, moving closer. "It's restricted access." Mark threw up his hands. "Great! So unless one of us gets clearance on the spot here, we're stuck with whatever the hell that thing was." Dr. Carter's mind reeled. Facility 47. Genetic experimentation. Enhanced cognitive abilities. His stomach clenched. Lucky. He glanced back toward the broken glass enclosure, his eyes falling on the dead monitor. Anna noticed. "What is it?" He didn't answer. Instead, he moved in a hurry, stepping over the shards of glass and pulling for the terminal. A security prompt flickered across the screen. Verification bioetrica obligatoria. His eyes locked on the lie. Dread welled in his chest. Then, instinctively, he raised his hand up and put it to the scanner. A loud beep. Mark and Anna froze. The screen flickered. A progress bar appeared. Then, in an instant, access. Granted. Mark blinked. "No way." Anna took a step back. "Carter, how did you just do that?" Dr. Carter's breathing was ragged. His palm lingered over the scanner, fingers trembling ever so slightly. He didn't know. He didn't want to know. The door lock clicked open with a mechanical hiss. No one moved. Mark broke the silence. "Oh my gosh, I have so many questions." Anna took hold of Dr. Carter's arm. "We need to go." Dr. Carter faltered, his mind still reeling. But then, a sound. A deep rumble from down the corridor behind them. The creature wasn't gone. It was coming back. Mark didn't wait. He reached for the door handle and pulled it open. "Go! Go!" They dashed into the building and slammed the door behind them. Darkness. For a moment, there was only their ragged breathing in the space. Dim red emergency lights powered in alongside, casting the room in the dull, ghostly light. And what they saw left them speechless. Rows of containment pods, filling the walls, each one's filled with fluid, and inside more of them, more dogs. Anna slapped a hand over her mouth. "Oh my God." Mark staggered forward, the eyes moving between the pods. How many of them are there? That beats that tightness in his chest. Storage with a pod wasn't the only place to check. They were active. One of them had a heartbeat monitor that still flickered on the control panel. Anna stepped forward, unsteady. "Some of them, they're still alive." Mark cursed under his breath. "This is insane. This is illegal. This is impossible." Dr. Carter barely heard them. A pod all the way at the end had his eyes. One that was open. And the name that's printed across it? His blood ran cold. This was the same creature that had attacked them, and it had come from here. Anna turned to him. "Carter, what do we do?" His voice was quiet. "We will find out what the hell happened here." Before anyone could act, the lighting flickered violently. Then, a noise coming from one of the sealed pods. A sharp, ragged breath. Something inner had just awakened. A loud, ragged breath rattled the darkened room. Dr. Carter, Anna, and Mark froze, their eyes darting toward the sealed containment pod that had just activated. A monitor was hooked to him, flashing all sorts of crucial signs. A heartbeat, steady, strong, something inside was alive. Mark swallowed hard. "Please tell me that's just a malfunction." Anna shook her head, her face drained of color. "No, it's waking up." Dr. Carter stepped up, his hands shaking, his eyes fixed on the frosted glass panel. Condensation trickled down the inside as something stirred. Another breath, shallow, uneven, then a hand, a dog paw, a smear against the glass. Anna drew in a sharp breath. Mark stumbled backward. Dr. Carter's mind raced, and this wasn't just another one of them. This one was different. He looked up at the identifier plate on the side of the pod. The faded, corroded text was all but unreadable, but he could discern one thing: Project 47B. Status: stasis mode engaged. His stomach dropped. Anna stepped forward with some hesitation. "Carter, is this another experiment?" Dr. Carter didn't answer. He had his mind on the thing inside. He could see it through the steam-smeared glass now. It had the look of a retriever, but its legs were a bit longer, its body leaner and more toned. Its fur was slightly lighter than Lucky's, almost white in the dim glow of the emergency lights. Then its eyes snapped open, amber, glowing. Mark stepped back instinctively. Nope, that's where I draw the line." Dr. Carter barely heard him. His pulse hammered, but his body did not move. Because unlike the other creature, the one that had attacked them, it wasn't snarling, it wasn't growling, it was just watching. Then, the pod hissed. The locking mechanism disengaged with a hiss of escaping steam. Anna's breath caught. "Carter!" Too late. The glass slid open. The creature paced forward, a rush of cold air spilling out. Slowly, carefully, it blinked, once, twice. Then it lowered its head. Dr. Carter's breath hitched. "It's not attacking." Anna clutched his arm. "How is that possible?" Mark gestured toward the open containment pod at the far side of the room. The only Subject 47A, the angry one, had escaped from. "This one is not like the other," Mark muttered. "Look at it. It's not behaving like a monster." Dr. Carter's mind raced. Why? Then it hit him. Lucky. He turned to Anna. "The experiment files. They only said that Subject 47 was completely stable, correct?" Anna nodded, glancing between him and the creature. "Yeah, but what does that even mean?" Dr. Carter turned back to the dog in front of them. Its ears flinched slightly, but it stayed motionless. "This one's not the unstable one," he said gently. "It's balanced." Mark frowned. "Balanced?" Dr. Carter spoke barely above a whisper. They were doing something other than just changing their bodies. He turned to Anna. They were attempting to change behavior. They weren't only making these dogs stronger, they were trying to make them smarter. Anna swallowed hard. "So, you're telling me this one knows what's going on?" Dr. Carter gazed at the creature. It inclined its head a little, as if it understood every word. He exhaled. "I think it does." For a long moment, no one said anything. Then, the creature inched forward a little bit. Anna tensed up, but Dr. Carter didn't budge. It stopped in front of him, close enough to see the coruscating patterns in its gold-hued eyes. Then, it did what none of them expected. It sat down. Anna's mouth fell open. Did it just... Mark blinked. "Nope, Not normal. That is not normal. Dr. Carter's heart was racing, though not out of fear. This was intentional. This was no dumb beast. This was something more. "What do we do now?" Anna whispered. Dr. Carter paused for a brief moment before kneeling. He extended his hand cautiously. The creature's eyes followed him as he moved, watching his every move. Then it leaned forward, and gently it nudged its nose into his palm. Dr. Carter caught his breath. For the first time since he had entered Facility 47, he wasn't afraid, but something told him. This was only the beginning. Dr. Carter's breath caught in his throat when the ragged man's voice carried through the tunnel. "I created you." Silence closed in on them like a vice. The golden retriever at Dr. Carter's side did not move, its amber eyes fixed on the intruder. There was recognition. "Carter, what do we do?" Anna whispered. Mark stepped back slowly, grasping his flashlight. "We leave, now." But before anyone could move, a sound, deep, guttural, from the darkness behind them. A tremor shook the tunnel walls as something stirred. Dr. Carter's pulse spiked. The man in front of them clutched his chest, his voice trembling. "They found us." A growl. Closer now. Anna's fingers dug in hard to Dr. Carter's sleeve. Mark exhaled sharply. "I truly, truly hate it when I'm right." Then the lights flickered, and everything went black.